Here we are. My name is Yavila McCoy. Yavila McCoy, right? The name itself connotes some kind of story, right? How did you get to be McCoy? How did you get, what's this name Yavila about? I'm an African American Jewish woman, yes? I hail from Brooklyn, New York. I was born Jewish to two African American Jewish parents. I was raised in an Orthodox setting in New York. I attended yeshiva day schools and received a very rigorous Jewish education, and I came through that education and decided to continue my work as an activist, as an educator, as a person committed to making something of the multiple identities that I bore through life and struggled throughout my entire journey to learn lessons from and turn into activism. Now, I'm often invited to come to places and to speak about my identity. People want to hear about being African American and Jewish because to some, that identity itself sounds strange, right? It sounds like an oxymoron of sorts. How do you come to be African American and Jewish? How are you Jewish is a question that I get often. But what I'm here to hold up for you and what I'm going to talk about in the context of my lecture today is the idea that hyphenated identities where peoples and communities and cultural traditions merge, are a sign of work being done in communities to eliminate a system of oppression that says that's not possible. Now, this can happen on a very personal level. It's possible that a person can be in an interracial relationship. A person can reach across a boundary that's created by oppression and form a very individualistic relationship. Yes, that happens all the time. What I think becomes powerful in the context of social justice is when those relationships that we form, those experiences that we have, lead us to figure out where we're missing each other, where there's more work that can be done, where there are things about our self-perception and about our perception of others that can change and shift in these diverse relationships. So today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a little bit of my story. But I'm also going to tell you about some of the lessons that I've learned around what it means to hold together without letting them come apart African American and Jewish communities. Now, there have been historical reasons why African American and Jews both came together and separated over the course of time. And those reasons are real. But as a person navigating those identities within, the question became, how do I navigate those identities and still turn whatever knowledge comes from the relationship of having them interrelate into activism, into social movement building, into making something bigger than just my personal edification, my personal and autonomous choice to be a certain kind of person. So more than anything, I want you to listen to what I have to say in the context of where can we extrapolate from these stories and from the things that I've journeyed through to a bigger picture around social justice. So the first thing I want to say is that having grown up in Brooklyn, I grew up in a very intense Jewish environment. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to situate my comments in the interest of time, especially because I know some of you will be coming and going, into those three stages in my life. The times when I grew up in an environment that was intensively Jewish and intensively white. The times in college when I entered into an evolutionary consciousness around my blackness, around my being an African American woman and what I wanted that to mean. The times in my life when I later in life started organizing Jews of color and trying to hold those identities together as not a hyphen, but one fluid identity, African American Jewish woman, yes? Okay, so what did I learn from walking among Jews? As a young girl walking among Jews, there were many messages in my environment. One of the messages that I received was that the most important part of my identity, growing up as a young African American woman, Jewish woman, was that orthodoxy and my relationship to the Torah. Does anyone know what the Torah is? So the Torah is the system of laws, the system of religions, the 5 books of Moses, yes? Orthodox Jews read the Torah not as an opportunity to hypothesize about ethics, but to existentially identify with those ethics as part of your very identity. Yes? So when you wake up in the morning, there's a prayer that you say in acknowledgement of the fact that you have life and the ability to do the Torah. In the afternoon, there are more prayers that you say in acknowledgement of the fact that a day has gone by, you've gone through your work and your daily living, and you still have energy in your body to continue to do the commandments and the Torah. And when you go to bed at night, there's another prayer that you say. And what does that prayer do? That prayer helps you to acknowledge again that your soul departs and returns and gives you another opportunity to get up another day to do the Torah. Yes? Okay. Very interesting existence for me as an African American Jew, because what that did was that put me in a context where my Jewishness was primary as my identity. Yes? What was most important, that I was a young Jew before God. And this happened systematically through education, through my observance of the holidays, through all the different interactions that I had. It was reinforced for me over and over again that I was a young a young Jewish woman as my primary identity. Now here's the catch. You can look at me, right? You see what I look like. You see how I present in the world. It's not necessarily true that when I left the Jewish community that I was able to hold that identity intact. Because when I would be walking around the community, a young black girl with, let's say, maybe 10 other white young girls, because in the time of the Orthodox community that I grew up in, we were, boys and girls did not mix in the Orthodox community, right? So I was walking around primarily with girls, but with white Jewish girls, primarily. And as I would walk around my Crown Heights community in Brooklyn, I would get stares. From the time I was very young, people would look at me and they would say, "What is she doing? What is she doing with all those white girls?" And then the next question became, well, it must be obvious that she wants to be white, yes? And the next came, oh, she's a class. Oh, that's that lottie-dottie black Jewish girl. That was the term I got around my Brooklyn neighborhood, lottie-dottie black Jewish girl. None of these things had anything to do with the reality of my actual circumstance, with the identity that my family was trying to give me around being an African American Jew. The truth is that my grandfather was a huge civil rights proponent. The language and the rhythms of civil rights were a part of my family from the time I was very young. My grandfather worked from being a longshoreman. He used to load things on the docks, and then from there, he worked up from being a longshoreman to an organizer to actually being the vice president of UAW AFL-CIO, okay? Years working in civil rights and labor union organizing. He organized security for Dr. King, yes? When I was young, I told the class that I was with this morning, my mother, some people used to be able to walk, and I'm dating myself. They used to be able to watch Warner Brothers and Tom and Jerry and cartoons when we had free time. My parents, when we had free time, would sit us down and have us watch Eyes on the Prize. I don't know if you know what Eyes on the Prize is, but Eyes on the Prize is a PBS documentary that surveys the civil rights movement from the early days of Houston and, Brown versus the Board of Education, all the way through to the civil rights movement and the marching and the voter registration drives and everything that happened in the 60s and 70s to actually empower communities around civil rights. The whole, I think it's about 5 discs, yes? Then we had VHS, but 5 long reels of information. And I used to have to sit there in my free time and get pounded in my black identity alongside my Jewish identity, because my parents did not want me, God forbid, to leave their doors not knowing who I was, yes? So there's an inner identity that I'm navigating, while I'm also navigating an external identity, which is that without a question, without any knowledge of who I am, I walk into the world, and what people would like to be first and foremost in their assessment of me is the color of my skin. Yes? First and foremost, you are black in the Jewish environments. First and foremost, you are Jewish. Yes? And in my own heart, a journey. Because what I'm going to say is that it takes years. It takes years for anyone who is carrying multiple identities to be able to coalesce those identities into something that's authentic and integritous. Is it true, 100%, that I would navigate the world as a black woman in many contexts first? Absolutely. Because no one's going to take time to have me fill an application before they enact my presence within a racist supremacist system. In a racist supremacist system, there's a binary. There are white people and there are people of color. And you don't get a choice. That's what racism does to society. Does that mean that where I sit in my own heart, does that mean that all of that around my Jewish identity, around the various beautiful culture that was going on in my home, does that mean all of that needs to be invisibilized and just totally not a part of the scenario? No. But do I need to know how to operate in the racist binary that comes from a supremacist system? Absolutely. So I was going into a yeshiva educational system with my mother saying things to me like this. She would say, you had better get an A. Why had I better get an A? Because you're the only black girl in that class. Yes, I'm now among Jews. You're the only black girl in that class. And they're not going to expect you to do well. And I want to make sure that you show them what you're capable of. So don't come in here with anything less than an A. Yes? Interesting, no? We're all Jews, but there's also race. I'm walking down streets with my fellow Jewish young women as teenagers, and our African American neighbors come down the street, yes? And there's a subtle shift to start crossing the street because an African American young male is coming toward us, and we don't want to be on the same side of the street anymore, yes? But yet I'm looking at a face that looks just like mine. Why are we crossing the street? Yes? Comes up in my consciousness. Why are we crossing the street? The fear that you have is not the fear that I have, yet we're all Jews. Yes? So navigating that consciousness of the difference between the duality of message that comes from the outside versus a message around your identity that can come from the inside was a very significant part of my journey. And one of the things that I learned early on was that it was important for me to self-identify an image that had not yet been envisioned. I created the image of myself. When I was looking in Jewish books, in Jewish literature, in all of the different ways in which I was educated, I saw no pictures of myself. Not just as a black woman. I saw no pictures of myself as a black Jewish woman. There were no role models. There was no way for me to understand what it might even look like for me to exist, much less take leadership, much less be the most powerful person that my mother and father insisted that I be. Where are the models, yes? So I found myself thinking, well, it can't be that there are no models. It must be that if I go to the Middle East, or it must be that if I go to a different country, there are going to be some people somewhere who look just like me, who actually are powerful and empowered, and it's just a matter of this temporary reality. And then I went to the Middle East, yes? And I found out that wasn't quite true. Racism has been exported from America all over the world. And I got into the desert with a bunch of beautiful, brown-skinned Arab sisters and brothers. And the first thing they said to me was, "Do you dance? Dance, black girl, dance!" And I said, what? What? I'm in the middle of the desert in the Middle East and you think my name is Janet Jackson? Really? Why? Because their expectation of me as a black woman had been exported from American stereotypes. American stereotypes for what it means to be black. So once again, I'm bumping into this idea that who you are has to be self-determined. Self-determined in a very unique and intentional way. How did I get there? I looked in my life to be able to find experiences that would be in contrast to my own. In contrast. So, whereas I became the president of the NAACP while I was in college, and whereas I took on black identity fiercely because I knew that was a part of my heritage and I knew it was a piece of how I needed to evolve, I simultaneously also took positions within Hillel. So what I did was I started trying to straddle two communities with my leadership, moving from one to the other. I say it was a gift of God, but there came a point in my junior year while I was in college, as I was experiencing Sonia Nieto and Arturo Madrid and all of the language of criticism and all of the language of women's studies and Africana studies that said that yes, you have the ability to self-determine, to bring in Afrocentric perspectives, to be able to take education and form it into an empowerment strategy. That was all there in the books. But in the context of my peers, two things happened. Number one, Kwame Ture came to campus. I don't know if you know who Kwame Ture is. He's Stokely Carmichael. Stokely Carmichael came to campus in my junior year. And meanwhile, Yavila is determining her own identity, right? I'm a leader in this, I'm a leader in that. I'm a cosmopolitan African-American Black Jew. I'm gonna be the next president of the United States. Yes, watch me roll, right? Yavila is in her element. And then all of a sudden, here comes externally imposed identity. Kwame Ture comes to our campus, and he puts up a sign that says, every Jew, a 22. Oh, not every Jew. Every Zionist is a racist. Yes? The only good Zionist is a dead Zionist. Yes. Lots of incendiary comments that did what? Incinerated flames on our campus. Okay? So whereas I had been happily navigating both the Black and the Jewish community with no real issue, now all of a sudden I would walk into the lunchroom and all my Jewish friends were sitting over here and all my Black friends were sitting over here. Why? Because at this point, the Jewish community felt that they had been targeted by an anti-Semite. Yes? The Black community felt they had every right to self-determine. This was a historic civil rights figure. Yes, he had some opinions about Jews, but why should the Jews be in such an uproar? Yes? And somewhere in between, there was no conversation. In that lack of nuanced conversation, there was also no place for me to sit. It got worse. In response to Kwame Ture coming to campus and targeting Zionists as racist and Zionists as colonialism and all sorts of different things that separated leadership communities, the Religious Zionist Alternative decided to bring to campus the son of Meir Kahane. I don't know if any of you know who Meir Kahane is, but he is also an extreme radical in the context of Jewish Zionist movement building. And what he did was he said, every Jew deserves a 22. Every Jew should have a gun. Yes? Jews have every right to defend their right to the land of Israel, and anybody who essentially disagrees with that should be faced with our guns in their faces. Yes, this is lovely to have go on campus, right? Okay, what happened is eventually, now you would think this is just polite political discourse. What happened eventually on my campus in Albany is that both the Jewish and the Black factions of leadership started to fight one another and go to the president's office and try to get each of them kicked off of campus. Okay? Kicked off of campus because this person isn't being politically moderate and that group is not being politically moderate. And what we're hearing is actually destroying our campus leadership. So let's just kick both of these groups off of campus. And it was then that I realized how important it was for me to have a grounded sense of my identity in both communities that would not allow either community to force me to have to choose. I went up as the president of the NAACP into a loaded lecture center hall like this, maybe 300 students. And in front of those 300 students, I felt something within me, which was that, you know what? There aren't enough Jews or Blacks on this predominantly white campus for us to feel like it really makes a whole lot of sense to get two of the leaders of the smallest minorities that we have here kicked off campus. Why don't we at least set up a meeting to listen to each other's perspectives? Rather than organize this huge ruckus for us to fight, are we each sure that we've heard each other clearly? Are the positions of these leaders our positions? And if they are, is there still no room for discourse? I'm saying this as a young college student. Pieces of the pie are too small. Our pieces of the pie probably only equal this much. You have to realize that there are all sorts of things that are happening on campus that affect both of our communities. How can we afford to fight innocently? And I left that meeting, and 2 days later got promptly a letter from my board saying that they wanted to impeach me as the president of the NAACP for having a conflict of interest in being both black and Jewish simultaneously. Why? Because in both of my communities, what I hadn't succeeded in doing, which became the next stage of my life, is creating a discourse where people could see me fully as both. If I am your sister, if I am your black sister struggling for liberation alongside you, and I happen to be Jewish, it would be wrong for any black sister or brother to ask me to forget the rest of my Jewish community in standing with you toward liberation. For my white Jewish sisters and brothers to ask me to forget my association and my commitment to the liberation of peoples of color in order to be a part of a Jewish community would be an absolutely wrong commitment. Now that's nothing I'm saying because I wanted to be another label I got, Miss Can't We All Get Along. I don't know if you remember Rodney King's statement at this time, but Rodney King, after the big thing that went on here, he made this statement to the media, can't we all get along? And it ran everywhere, right? Rodney King was Mr. Can't We All Get Along. So Mrs. Can't We All Get Along. But what happened as a result of me sticking with that stance was that I did find allies. There were allies both in the professors that taught me in my African Studies department that came and said, oh, no, we don't. We're letting our kids get involved in what's happening here, and this is wrong. Our kids should know better than to try to lynch one of their own. That was literally what I was told. And in the Jewish community, I found there was a little bit more fear and resistance. But when I finally did get the professors and my fellow leaders of color together in a room where we were on our own, and I'm telling you guys, this is very important. When you reach a situation of conflict, it's not always the best thing to get everybody in the room, as I suggested, and let them talk to each other, because emotions are high. The first thing that has to happen is for people to feel validated, people to understand that you have listened and that you understand where they're coming from. So the first move that my professor suggested to me was to sit down with my own community, my community of Jewish leaders of color, not yet, my community of leaders of color, and to sit down with them and for us to hear each other. What is it that's coming up here? What is it that we want? What is it that is ruffling our feathers to the point of wanting to fight our Jewish brothers and sisters? And a lot of what came up were people sitting in the student association and watching white Jewish students vote against affirmative action. Watching white Jewish students not stand in alliance with black struggles that were going on campus. Watching all sorts of things that happened as a result of lack of relationship prior to Kwame Ture coming to campus. Not because he was in campus, but that his coming to campus lit fires that were already existing because of lack of nuanced relationship. When it came to the Jewish community, and we finally did get into conversation, what I found was I was dealing with a community that was living in fear. People don't always understand that with the white privilege that's been conferred to many in the Jewish community has not come an insusceptibility to internalized oppression. Jews as a community have been victimized for thousands of years. Do you understand this? That means that in the black community, as we struggle to be able to release ourselves from the internalized oppression that came from slavery and from being oppressed in this country, there are practices that we act out upon each other as a black community that are entirely unhelpful to ourselves and others, but that we can only work on in the safety of communication with one another, where we can talk to each other about what it means to create hierarchies of value around light and dark skin. That in these close communities where we can talk about what is our xenophobic reaction to the GLBT community that lives among us as people of color, where we can talk about what happened to us around issues of sexism and around issues of respecting and holding on to ourselves as women and as fathers and as leadership figures. There are real things that are internal conversations within the Black community that occur all the time that help us to be our best selves. But if you really know that, it does not pay to know that in a silo. When we look next to ourselves, to the struggles of our Jewish community, realize that those same conversations are going on. Those same conversations are happening around internalized oppression, but under a different lens. And yes, with white skin privilege. I went to a Jewish women's conference where the speaker asked in a room of almost 300 white Jewish women, raise your hand if over the course of your life you have ever had surgery to alter your body in any way. It astounded me to watch 2/3 of the hands in the room go up, with women admitting that they had cut off their noses, with women admitting that they had done things to shape their skin, to alter their body size, their hips from being too heavy, to essentially graduate themselves toward a more white, Eurocentric image. And in this women's conference, these white Jewish women cried over the consequences of internalized oppression for that community. We need to understand that internalized oppression sometimes looks like a desire to oppress another group. But what it really is a shared struggle to release ourselves from a system that has hurt all of us. It's hurt all of us. One of the most important things I learned in that year when I was at SUNY Albany was that there was something that I could hold on to in respecting and valuing both of the communities that I came from. There was something I could hold on to in both of them that allowed them to see their mutual humanity. If there's nothing else that I would tell you is important about embracing dual identity and multiple identities in this country, is that in the places where we forget one another, people who carry dual identities will remind you. In the places where we are sure that what this is about is an opportunity to separate, to hurt, they'll remind you of our common oppressor outside of both of us. Why? Because just to be themselves, people who are carrying dual identities have to constantly keep their ears and eyes open for what is the real oppression at work here. What is the real oppression at work here? I want to talk a little bit about what it's been like to be able to navigate the community, both as a person of color among other people of color, and as a Jew of color. One of the things that as Jews of color we tend to navigate, and I'm speaking in plural now because I did spend some time organizing Jews of color here in the United States. And one of the things that we've encountered in the context of our relationship to the Black community is that at times, because of our internalized oppression, I just talked to you about internalized oppression for Jews, I'm going to talk to you about internalized oppression for Blacks. In the Black community, difference is often seen as dangerous and suspect. Yes? Not our fault, just the way it's come in. Why? Because when it comes to the idea that we had to fight and struggle for unity, we often took the need for homogeneity and conformity as our strength. Meaning, the Black church did battle for the African American community over the course of time. It helped us keep our families together. It gave us a space to be able to grow our leaders. It gave us values, ethics, understandings of ourselves that helped us to graduate beyond oppression, yes? But it also helped us to forget that as a community of spiritualists, the people of color that constitute our world are not in majority Christian. Think about that for a second. If I were to snap my fingers and bring every person of color that exists in the world into this room with us, people of color would be more diverse around spirituality than that. So what right do we have to superimpose upon every person of color that the more Christian you are, the more you are involved in the Black church, the more Black you are? Yes? The more African American that you are. As a Jew of color, I've learned to notice that as a symptom of IO, internalized oppression. There's also the issue that the fact that as of 1980, the demographics of the black community changed rapidly. We're no longer all descendants of the African American history that lives in our country. We have people here who are African, people here are Caribbean, people who identify people of color who are Latino, people who identify people of color from all around the world. And a superimposition of homogeneity upon all of those peoples, upon all of those cultures, upon all of those contributing factors to what it means to be black under the binary. Yes? It's the binary that's the problem. Black, white. Yes? If you're Caribbean, black, white. If you're Jamaican, black, white. If you're Trinidadian, black, white. If you are from Nigeria, black, white. Yes? That's a stripping of the diverse culture that exists among us as people of color. And when we collude with that by saying, this is not black enough, that is not black enough, that is not black enough, when it does not conform with an American standard for blackness itself, we are losing out. Now, Jews of color get caught in that trap. I told you about some of the little epithets that I got running around my community in Brooklyn, right? It came from a misunderstanding that number one, all Jews are white, and number two, that black people couldn't be anything beyond Christian. In a day of liberation for my black community, I would like to see us have the opportunity to welcome the full breadth of our identity, including the presence and the commitment to people of color by Jews of color. The other piece is this. In the context of struggles toward liberation, there are markers. There are markers that help us to share what we call a linked fate. A linked fate as people of color. It means that when we go out there and we see wrongs being done, we want to be able to say, I'm a part of the fate. I'm a part of the movement toward making all people of color in this country have a better ride, have a better road, have a better opportunity. Yes? It comes out of our history and out of our heritage. But the question is, can you still share in that linked faith if you also have some interests beyond that community? What about black GLBTs? Yeah? What if your commitment is to seeing the GLBTQI community be liberated? Not just among people of color, but among all GLBT residents. Does that mean you're no longer able to have a sense of shared linked faith with the liberation of black people? What if I happen to care about the elimination of anti-Semitism? What if that's big for me? Does that make me any less committed to the proliferation of liberation for all peoples of color? Absolutely not. But yet, has our thinking in the black community become nuanced enough to be able to accept such a proposition? Has it? All I can tell you is that the more Jews of color that show themselves and that become present and that are celebrated among the communities of color will allow us to have that conversation. And that is something that I'm reaching for simultaneously, while I'm also reaching for an end to the proliferation of whiteness as an assumed identity among Jews. The third space that is so very important that I hope people will begin to think about is that just like there is external work, there's always internal work. Yes? The internal work among Jews of color is to even be able to be visible, to show up with some interests that aren't the ones that other people have donated to them. Both in black and Jewish communities, I have found Jews of color situated within other people's agendas so often till people want to scream. People use, the minute there needs, when Farrakhan was in his element and there were Jews that were decrying Farrakhan's organizing of the Million Man March and what they called anti-Semitic remarks that he was putting forth in the country. The first thing people wanted to do, and I found it happened to me and other Jews of color, is, well, we're going to get our Jews of color out there, and we're going to have our Jews of color talk to Farrakhan. Without a question, there's a huge assumption in there. Is it in any way in the interest of Jews of color to have a conversation with Farrakhan about anything? we share black skin color with Farrakhan, does that mean Farrakhan has any interest in hearing from us in regard to his position and his stance on what it means to be a black Muslim? 3, why? 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 That's always the question. Before I go out in my activism, do anything, first and foremost in my mind is, what is motivating you? For whom is this dialogue? For whom is this conversation? At the end of this dialogue, how is it going to benefit me? Yes? Okay. So in the Jewish community, Jews of color have been used in so many different ways to be able to validate conversations that really need to be had around race, but that people will use Jews of color to hide behind not to have. That needs to end. In black communities, when people want to say, oh, let me tell you a story about how racist you are, white Jews. Let me go find my Jew of color. Come here, come here. Tell them about how racist they were to you so I can prove to these people that they are racist. No, absolutely not. Because my agenda is not to have either of you call each other anything that's going to relegate you to a category instead of your basic humanness. My agenda is to get you to remember each other's humanness, remember shared histories of oppression, remember the struggles where we were able to stand together, and what was the reasoning by which we had to part. That's what my agenda as a Jew of color would be, not to be able to be positioned as something, as a category of difference that can be used as a target. So Jews of color need to have conversations that are self-interested toward themselves. They also need to understand what it means to get to move out of the status of passing. And when I say passing, that means that when we're among people of color, we don't talk about being Jewish, and we're among being Jews, we don't talk about being black. Why? Because whatever tension exists between the two communities, we don't want to have to put up with them, so you engage in passing. Yes? Wrong. Because all that does is never enter into discourse the conversation of, well, what about the fact that we can be more, both as blacks and Jews? What about that conversation? If we don't show ourselves, that conversation never comes up. I say it most poignantly to my Jewish counterparts by saying, until you acknowledge what the history is of Jewish whiteness, you leave no room for me to have a conversation with you about what it means for me to be a Jew of color. You can't just call me a Jew of color. I got to be a Jew of color because you were a white Jew. And until we talk about that, there's nothing to discuss that's in my interest. That's me being situated in your political theory. Yeah? For Jews of color, the other thing that's so important and that I managed to do through the activism that I did in my organization was Jews of color need to look into other Jews of color faces and notice that they are beautiful. They are not an objectification. They are not somebody else's whatever. They are beautiful. In a room full of leaders of color that I organized, maybe 25, it was so poignant for me. 2 moments. One moment. A gentleman who was the president of his synagogue came in. He happened to be a gay, black Jewish man, and he started his introduction. Everybody went around to introduce themselves. He started his introduction by saying this. Well, you know, it's just so good to be here. Oh, it's just so good to be here. I mean, you don't understand. As a black Jewish man, as a black gay Jewish man, it's not often that I'm able, and then immediately before he could even get that string out of his mouth, another gay Jewish man across the way from the circle just raised his hand. He said, that doesn't make you special here, brother. And everyone laughed. Why? Because what it said to those 2 gay Jewish men of color is something very significant, which is that there are times when what you're holding up as your battle can fall away, and you get to experience yourself as just yourself. And that is a beautiful moment. Yes? That is a beautiful moment. So that was one. And then the second thing was 2 young multiracial girls kind of had, bushy afros, curly afros. The first days that they came to the conference, they came downstairs to breakfast with their hair straightened. Yeah? And that's how I had met them. Straight hair. And I didn't realize that they were spending hours upstairs with a blow dryer, blowing that sucker out until it was straight. Yes? So, because that was how they presented themselves in the world of Jews. By the second or third day, something very significant had happened. And I could tell because both of these girls had come downstairs with their hair in full Afro curly glory. Yes? And when we sat down together and we started talking about what are the challenges and what are the struggles of the identity of being a Jew of color, I noticed these two women kind of fall on each other's shoulders and start to cry. It still makes me cry. Why? Because and I asked them later what was going on, and they said that when I came downstairs, I wasn't sure how people were going to react to me showing up with my hair like that. I didn't know if people were going to whisper or talk or do what. And when I saw this other woman standing there with her hair in the same way, it just made me cry, because I had never been in a Jewish space where I could be myself as a Jew of color and not have to worry about being judged. These are spaces that can only be created when people who have these differences, who are struggling with these challenges, find each other and mirror for one another you're beautiful, you're okay, you're great, just as you are. If we really want to work toward liberation, in addition to working on our internal issues wherever we stand on the spectrum, we also should try to afford spaces for others where they can have those moments where they just are, and that's okay. Yeah? Okay. So I'm going to pause now because we have about 5 minutes. And I want to give you a chance to ask me questions if you have it. But I thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to just hold up some prisms of life for you around what it means to carry multiple identities, and to hope through those multiple identities that our entire world will become better and less oppressive and less full of oppressive practices that don't just hurt those people targeted by them, but that hurt us all and rob us of each other. So thank you very much. All right. Any questions about what I've just put forth?
I know that you had mentioned, you said that you grew up in an Orthodox setting, and I was wondering if you worked with any conservative temples or reform settings, and have your experiences with those?
Yeah, sure. When I got to college, I told you I was looking for opportunities to compare and contrast my own identity to others. So I did my degree in education, so I actually did practical teaching in Reform and Conservative synagogue, so I could learn what that was about. And yes, liberal Jews did have more of the trappings of what it meant to be welcoming across racial differences. But I found that there were other challenges around liberalism, in that I was also working in affluent communities that were primarily white, where there was an absence of relationship with other people of color. So to study relationship with people of color in the absence of relationship with people of color is problematic. And it gets very problematic in terms of what that interaction actually turns out to look like. So there were other challenges there that I learned and tried to integrate into my theory. Any other questions people have? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, when I thought about Jews of African heritage, I thought of adoption and conversion. And then I'm hearing your situation where both your parents were of African heritage, or Jewish, Ethiopian Jews. Can you talk about the spectrum of Black Jews?
Yeah, you can arrive at the status of being a Jew of color from various different entry points. But all Jews arrive as being Jewish from various entry points, so it's not so unique. But among Jews of color, it can be because you grew up in a country where people happen to have brown skin, and you live in a historic Jewish community. There are lots of communities like that. Ethiopia, there are communities in Africa, there are communities in Yemen, and in Jerba, and in Uzbekistan, and all these different places where people have brown skin, and they've been Jewish their entire lives, and that's just the way it is. And that's one way to be a Jew of color. Another way to be a Jew of color is through conversion, but that doesn't limit the status of being a Jew of color only to conversion, because once I happen to have skin like this and I have a couple of babies and they have a couple of babies, there's no guarantee that my grandbabies are still not going to look just like me, right? And that those grandbabies are not converts. Those are Jews according to Jewish heritage, yes? And then there's transnational adoption, where there are many families that become multiracial by adopting children from other countries that have brown skin. And there are ways to be able to become a Jew of color just by virtue of the fact that you have married. Let's say you're not Jewish yourself, but you've married a Jew and you're raising children who happen to be Jews of color. There are various entry points to what it means to be a Jew of color. The question and the thing that I think is important that I've learned from navigating both communities is to not make assumptions about what identity as a Jew means. And that leaves room for all of these different entry points to Judaism to actually reverberate and be celebrated. The biggest enemy to understanding Jews of color, like I said, is the assumption that Jews are all white. That's just not been true historically, and it isn't true presently. In the same way I said that there's religious diversity in the black community, if I snap my fingers and brought every Jew in the world into this room right now, Jews would look more diverse than the United Nations. So, that's just, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, good. You?
Oh, okay. You were talking about me, so I wasn't sure. You were talking about the moment when you realized that you're not just like the black identity and the Jewish identity, but you're a person.
Yes.
Okay, so how do you then go and fight against the racism battle and the anti-Semitic battle and all of that without losing yourself? No?
Yeah.
How do you?
Audre Lorde said, forget that I am black and never forget that I am black. Yes? She wants her allies to do this dual consciousness thing with her where sometimes it matters and sometimes it doesn't. And I think the person has to know when it matters and when it doesn't. And that was a part of my evolutionary journey. There are times when it really does matter that I carry this identity, that I carry an identity as a Jewish woman and I carry identity as a black woman. And there are times when I'm navigating that and I insist on that matter. And then there are times when it really doesn't matter and it's being introduced kind of like as a footnote in a way that objectifies me. And at those times when it's really not supposed to matter, I have to insist, no, it doesn't matter. And it's kind of a yin-yang that you learn as a result of developing a very heightened sense for oppression. When is oppression at work and my identity is trying to be situated within oppression? And when it's not about oppression, it's just ignorance, it's just a situation. Yeah.
Just a comment, really. I recently also been speaking on this idea of beauty, so your comments, particularly with regards to these girls, was very, very powerful for me. And I think some of what was touching for me about just hearing that and seeing how you reacted to that is this inextricable link between truth and beauty. And when we know truth because it's beautiful, and to be able to see those girls as they are and not as they have to pretend to be is very powerful. So that just helps me a lot in so many things that I've been thinking about lately, and I really appreciate that. The way you embody that whole idea.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
Okay.